Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. Thanks for joining us. We begin again in Ferguson, Missouri, where city officials are pledging to work with community leaders following the police-related death of Michael Brown. Marcy Gonzalez now live in Ferguson.
This afternoon, just a few miles from here in St. Louis, officers shot and killed a man they say was coming towards them with a knife. And now police are worried that some of the anger over that could spill over and add to the tension here in Ferguson. Today, relative quiet on the streets of Ferguson after yet another night of violent clashes between demonstrators and police. Shots fired at officers who responded with tear gas.
There is a dangerous dynamic in the night. It allows a small number of violent agitators to hide in the crowd and then attempt to create chaos.
Of the 78 people arrested, police say only 4 were from here in Ferguson. They claim more than a dozen others came from out of state to join the protests that start every day as peaceful demonstrations, calling for action after the shooting death of an unarmed teenager more than a week ago.
Hands up, don't shoot!
Today, Officer Darren Wilson, who killed Michael Brown, shooting him 6 times, according to autopsy results, is in hiding. The officer's friend says Wilson is struggling with what happened.
I could never imagine him shooting anybody, even as a police officer. You know, I can tell that this is really hard on him.
And a grand jury could start hearing evidence in this case as soon as tomorrow. And we've learned Michael Brown's funeral will be held on Monday. Live in Ferguson, Missouri, Marcy Gonzalez, ABC News. Now back to you.
All right, Marcy, thank you very much. Now, the unrest in Ferguson is drawing criticism from former NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly. In an interview with Bloomberg News, Kelly said, quote, officials can reduce violence in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson by releasing all the available details about the shooting death of an unarmed black teenager. He went on to add, you can tell them what you know and tell them what you don't know, rather than dribbling it out. And certainly no shortage of criticism for the way police have handled the situation in Ferguson. Police on all levels, whether it be local, county, or even on the state level. Want to bring in our panel tonight, and we have a terrific political panel. Ed Cox is with us. He is the chairman of the New York State Republican Party. Dominic Carter is here, political journalist and author. Basil Smikle returns, political analyst and an adjunct professor at Columbia University. And O'Brien Murray is back, a Republican strategist, co-founder of the New York Meeting, and senior advisor to the Nan Hayworth campaign. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. It's a political panel, and I want to ask start with a political question, which is about President Obama and his role in all this. He said very little. He had a statement last week. He came out and he made another statement from the White House yesterday. He is also, whether he likes it or not, a de facto civil rights leader in this country, given that he's the first African-American president. Has President Obama done enough on Ferguson and when it comes to what I'll call race relations in general in his time in office? And you're closest to me, Basil, so I'll start with you.
I like that response.
You know what? I actually am quite mixed about this for a few reasons. One, I do want him to say more about this Michael Brown incident. Even if he doesn't support Michael Brown per se, he can talk about the concerns affecting communities of color, and that this is something that we've only seen in leading up to the 60s and early 70s, rather than something that should be taking place right now. He said a little bit of that, but I do want him to go more. I wanted him to go further in Trayvon, and I say that really because when he got elected, his very good friend Henry Louis Gates, professor at Harvard, gets arrested and for going into his own home, and he brings the professor and the police officer that arrested him to the White House for a beer. So what that looks like is that he has this one standard for people sort of his ilk, and another standard for young, poor black men in small town, quote unquote, America. I couple that with also the 80 or some odd people that got shot during the 4th of July weekend in Chicago, and there was no engagement on that issue as well. So I understand to some extent the politics of not going too far, but I do think because a lot of folks elected him or view him and elected him to be a different type of leader, that we want him to go a little further and be a little stronger.
Anybody else want
to? Presidents get themselves in trouble when they weigh in on cases that should be tried before the jury. They should not do that. Secondly, I think that President Obama could have weighed in earlier on this and called out those few people who are really creating the violence here. All he said was those who created it leads to more chaos. He should have said, don't do that. That's not the way to peacefully protest.
It seems like the president doesn't have a plan for what he's doing here. He's sending Holder in now at this point.
Tomorrow, Holder goes
which
tomorrow.
politicizes, I think. I think he's too much of a lightning rod in all this. He could have sent another advisor in days ago to have this conversation and see what's going on down there. He could have sent some other lawyer in that could become a special prosecutor at some point instead of Holder and the Justice Department and make it a racial issue, which is what Holder's a lightning rod for a lot in this country at this point.
Sending Holder in makes it a racial issue?
Is,
I don't understand.
Holder.
Wait, so because the Attorney General happens to be African American,
No,
that means it
it's
makes it a
because
racial
what this
issue?
Attorney General has done with the Civil Rights Department so far.
So how does it become a racial issue?
What this
with him
Attorney
going
General,
to St.
what
Louis?
this Attorney General has done with the Civil Rights Department of the Justice Department has been wrong from the get-go, and there's been a lot of divisiveness across the board. That department in and of itself, the way this Attorney General runs it, is not the way to go at this process. The way to go at this process is to, as Ray Kelly said, get all the facts, but have somebody in there that's not a lightning rod. And this Attorney General
how is this
a
Attorney
lightning
General
rod.
who's beloved in the black community? How is he a lightning rod?
He's beloved in the black community, maybe only because he's black, not because he is a good. No, it's not. Look what he's done right now across the board on political issues like voting rights, okay? He makes them 100% racial instead of 100% factual. You're asking the question, and you're asking the question about what is going on.
Republicans are trying to cut back on voting. Using,
No, we are
using
not. We are not. That is a Democratic talking point,
using
Dominic.
IDs,
Dominic,
and all
that is a
types of
Democratic
stuff.
talking
And so,
point.
because Holder calls that out, that makes him racial.
What I'm saying is he is a divisive person in this issue. The question on the table is, how should the president handle it? The president should handle this by having a plan of attack on how to deal with this so the facts come out without it being politicized. Holder makes it political. That's my statement.
The president, and I respect what you're saying, OB.
Don't agree with it. I respect
definitely
that.
don't. I don't agree.
Welcome back to RFL.
I certainly don't agree with it. One of the boldest things the president can do in this case is send in the Attorney General. Let's face it, every black person in America believes the deck is stacked in Ferguson, Missouri. No person of color believes there's going to be justice.
That's not true.
Wait, let me finish. I said person of color.
That's not true.
Okay,
Jason Riley will totally disagree with you from the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, well,
And I'm just telling you, he's a black man
Good for
who's
Mr.
written
Riley.
about this issue.
Okay. Let's look at this for 1 second. The prosecutor, his father was murdered by an African American. His mother works for the police department in that area. He has 4 or 5 relatives working for the police department. We're talking about the same prosecutor that's going to take this case apparently to the grand jury. And do you really believe an indictment's going to come out of this? Do you really? This is the same prosecutor that criticized the governor after the governor said, pull back the police, you're inciting the situation. Do you really believe this prosecutor is going in there with, and that people in that community, more importantly, forget what I think. Do you think people in that community, African Americans, have faith in this prosecutor?
Shouldn't the prosecutor be given a chance, though? Same with Donovan on Staten
I don't think so. I really don't. In this case, given his family background, I don't think so. And that's why it's important for Holder to be in there, because what Holder is saying is the moment you drop this ball, we're picking it up on civil
I'll
rights.
give you this. The prosecutor shouldn't do it, and neither should Holder. Both of them should be out, and somebody else should come in.
I actually think Holder has a role here to play to make sure that everybody is behaving the way they're supposed to in the court process, in the legal process. But I think one of the things that we need to look at is if the ball gets rolling and if there is an indictment that comes down, let's just say that actually does happen, are they going to be moving for a change in venue? I think that's one of the things that we also need to look at, because I imagine that the officers, attorneys are going to say, we can't get a fair trial here.
Basil, earlier you mentioned the Gates case. People at home might remember it as the Beer Gate or the beer summit that they had at the White House. I want to go back to that just because President Obama was so criticized after that and the way he handled that incident. Do you think it's made him gun shy in dealing with racial issues, or perhaps made him miss out on the opportunity to be more of a transformational figure when it comes to race in the United States?
Well, you're asking me some tough questions, man. I just can't. But I would say, my sense of this is that he did something for someone that he was very close to at that time. if, and this is sort of my personal opinion, if you were looking at the President of the United States as a candidate, Barack Obama, to be the sort of standard bearer of race issues nationally, you were going to be disappointed. He did not run his campaign that way, except for one very important speech that sort of changed the conversation when he was trying to create some separation between himself and Reverend Wright. But by and large, he wasn't the race talker in 2008. He ran a fairly race neutral campaign, and I think going into the White House. And in his tenure in the White House, I don't know if the Beergate incident made him gun shy. I just think he is uncomfortable broadly talking about race issues and being race specific. But when you combine that with some of the tensions in DC itself, I think it makes him hesitant to want to push forward.
I'm curious for the opinion of the rest of the panel, because we heard some people saying that his election meant that we were entering a post-racial America, and I think you just look at the headlines today, and clearly we're not there. Do you think this president has been gun-shy on race?
Well, he's African-American. I agree with you, Basil. He didn't run that way. And certainly when you're president of the United States, you're president of all the people. Right. And he should consciously act that way. Right. And I think the Gates thing, he slipped a little bit on that, and he's gone back to where every president should be, and that is not commenting on cases before they're tried before a jury.
Yeah, and I think, I do think one of the things he has to do, even if you take the support for the individual at the heart of this case in Michael Brown out of, if you extricate that from, what the president should be doing here, one of the things that he could do is be sort of the consoler in chief. And earlier, he should have come out and said, look, we know this. I know this is going to be an explosive situation, but we need to calm down here.
And that'd be tough on those who are creating the violence, those few, and do that. That'd be a very good combination for a president of the United States.
Andrew, the president, to answer your question directly, the situation with Michael Brown, it's already a polarizing issue. Polling has already shown African Americans see this one way, and white Americans see it completely different. So the president of the United States, the first African-American president, he's already being criticized for what he's done. So, and put yourself in his shoes. I agree with you, Mr. Chair. He's the president of all the people. But if he comes out and says black, the far right will go absolutely batty. And so some African-Americans, a few that don't understand politics, are criticizing him. He can't go much further. He's doing all that he can do as president.
I'll give you the last word.
The one thing that I will say, and why I still think that he could come out stronger, is because he's shown that when he wants to, he will pull the full force of the White House behind a particular issue. And I call folks' attention to same-sex marriage. When he decided that this is something that he wanted to talk about and put it front and center, he did that in a very, very significant way. Whether you agree or disagree with it, he did do that.
He let
so
Joe
when he
Biden
chooses,
do it.
so when,
he let Joe
but then he
Biden
came out
do it.
afterwards.
But
then he came
this
out
was a
right.
man
But however
who
he did it,
this is a man who doesn't know what his vision is, who doesn't know how to execute anything, and who let, in that case, Joe Biden went out and did that.
right. And I understand the strategy behind putting Biden out there to sort of test the waters.
I don't
but
think
the reality
that
is,
was not a strategy.
But the reality is he did.
That was Joe Biden being Joe. That was Joe Biden being Joe Biden.
I think it came from the White House. I think the signal came from the White House.
The closest it came to the White House is they had a conversation 2 months before that, when Biden forgot it was still a secret.
We got to leave it there. I got to move on. On Monday, we asked you at home to share what you thought should be done to calm the situation in Ferguson. We're continuing to ask you that question. Head over to our Facebook and our Twitter page. We got some responses we want to share. Juanita says the officer does not need to be put on administrative leave, paid time off. The officer needs to be put on trial like any other citizen that murders an unarmed man in cold blood by shooting him 6 times, 2 of which was in the head. Dante wrote in, the real question here is what should be done about the lawlessness and the lawless behavior of law enforcement in America. Jeanette wrote, have no idea, but the militarization of the police and bringing in the National Guard is not going to make things any easier. And once again, we invite you to join our conversation and weigh in on that same question. Again, go to our Facebook page or our Twitter and sound off. We're going to take a quick break here on RFL. Up next, we're going to bring it back here to New York, where Staten Island District Attorney Dan Donovan assembling a grand jury now to weigh in on the death of Eric Garner. We'll tell you why Reverend Al Sharpton says that move is not enough.